What if a simple anonymous note was the reason you're still alive today? Imagine receiving a message, no signature, no explanation, just a few words scribbled on a piece of paper. Would you listen to it? Would you change your plans because of something that vague, that mysterious? It sounds absurd until you realize that those few words might have just saved your life. The power of a single moment, a single decision, can alter everything, and sometimes that moment comes wrapped in mystery. Throughout history, there have been stories that defy logic, accounts of people who, for some reason they couldn't explain, stepped away from disaster at the last second, a missed flight, a delayed train, a sudden feeling of dread. And at the center of many of these stories, there's always something, a message, a dream, a warning, something that doesn't quite fit into the ordinary world, something that whispers, "Don't go." Today you're going to uncover one of those stories, a tale so strange, so chilling, it will make you question everything you think you know about fate, coincidence, and the invisible forces that might be watching over us. It begins with a flight, a routine journey, nothing out of the ordinary. Tickets booked, plans made, luggage packed. But just before boarding, a letter arrives, no return address, no sender, just a short message with a single instruction. And against all reason, the person who received it listened. Have you ever had that gut feeling telling you to turn back? Or maybe something small stopped you, traffic, a phone call, a sudden change of heart. You might not think twice about it, but what if that delay was the reason you were spared from something tragic? What if there's more to these moments than we're allowed to understand? The story you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a real account of someone who escaped death, not because of luck, but because of a mysterious warning, a note that arrived out of nowhere and changed everything. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. As the layers of this story unfold, you'll find yourself wondering, who sent the message? How did they know? And most importantly, why this person? The idea that our lives can pivot on a sentence, a few words from an unknown hand, is as unsettling as it is fascinating. Is it chance? Or is there something or someone guiding us away from danger? The anonymous letter in this story isn't just a clue. It's the start of a terrifying journey into the unknown, a place where reason ends and something far more mysterious begins. And just when you think you've figured it out, everything shifts. And just when you think you've figured it out, everything shifts. The path that seemed so clear becomes tangled in questions. Was it intuition? Was it a warning from someone who knew more than they should? Or was it something even deeper? Something beyond our world, reaching out in silence to protect just one soul? It's in moments like these that we realize how fragile everything is. One decision, one heartbeat, one sentence. That's all it takes for your entire life to veer off the path you thought it would follow. And that's why stories como essa mexem tanto como a gente. Because maybe, just maybe, we've felt something similar. A strange hesitation, a quiet voice inside, a choice we still can't explain. If this story resonates with you, if it reminded you of something you've lived, or sparked a memory that never left, share it with me in the comments. I'd really love to hear what this stirred inside you. Sometimes it's in these exchanges that we realize we're not alone in what we feel. And if this kind of story moves you, if you believe that there's something bigger guiding us, protecting us, or at least trying to reach us, then take a second to like this video. It helps more than you can imagine. And subscribing is how we keep this space alive. A space where we can keep diving into these mysteries together. Your presence here isn't just another view. It's part of uma comunidade que sente, pensa e se conecta com o inexplicável. A sua participação aqui é o que faz esse canal crescer e alcançar mais pessoas com esse tipo de conteúdo. And now, with that strange letter still burning in our thoughts, let's go deeper. Because what happened after that anonymous warning is something no one saw coming. Clara Bennett was never the kind of person who believed in signs. She trusted numbers, structure, and clear reasoning, the kind of mindset you develop when life demands responsibility more than imagination. As a financial analyst juggling spreadsheets, school pickups, and performance reviews, Clara had trained herself to keep both feet firmly on the ground, even when she was 30,000 feet in the air. Flights had become routine, part of her carefully constructed balance between career and motherhood. But that particular flight, the one leaving LaGuardia at 8:42 a.m. on September 14th, was different. Not because of the destination, not because of the schedule, but because of something she couldn't explain, something that defied the logic she had always relied on. The anonymous message, just 5 words long, "Don't get on that plane," wouldn't leave her mind. She stared at the screen in disbelief, rereading it as if another glance might reveal some hidden context. It didn't. It remained as raw and unsettling as when she first saw it. She checked the sender. Again, nothing. No address, no clue. Her inbox showed it had arrived at 4:17 a.m. in the dead silence of dawn, when most people are still suspended between sleep and consciousness. That alone sent a chill down her spine. The practical voice in her head tried to take control. Ignore it. People get weird emails all the time. You're just tired. Go home. Your kids are waiting. But underneath that rational tone, something deeper stirred. A subtle unease, not dramatic, but enough to tighten her chest. Every time she looked at her boarding pass, why this flight? Why her? Clara was staying in a modest hotel on 7th Avenue, the kind with beige carpets and tiny coffee makers, nothing remarkable. Her suitcase sat half-zipped on the bed, and the taxi to the airport was scheduled for 6:30. The plan was clear: fly home, pick up the kids from her sister's house, and dive straight back into the rhythm of unfinished homework and reheated dinners. But for the first time in years, she felt paralyzed by a choice that had no apparent logic. Canceling the flight made no sense, and yet boarding it felt wrong. That was the paradox. She called the airline, her fingers trembling slightly, told them she was feeling unwell, that she wouldn't be flying after all. The attendant was kind, offered to rebook for the afternoon. Clara agreed, almost automatically, hanging up before she could talk herself out of it. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city skyline, her mind racing. She felt ridiculous and relieved at the same time. At 9:04 a.m., she received the first notification. The flight she was supposed to be on had experienced mechanical failure shortly after takeoff. The news alert was vague, as they often are in the first moments, just enough to trigger anxiety without offering answers. But Clara knew. She didn't know how or why, but she knew something had tried to reach her, something had warned her. As more details came in, the reality took shape. The aircraft had made an emergency descent. There were injuries. Some passengers were missing. Clara sat motionless, phone in hand, her heart pounding, not just from fear, but from realization. She could have been there. She should have been there, but she wasn't. This wasn't just about luck. It felt like stepping into the hidden corridors of reality, the ones we don't talk about because they challenge our sense of control. Clara's story isn't just a story of survival. It's a story about the moment your perception of the world cracks just a little and you glimpse something behind the curtain. A truth we rarely admit. Sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones we can't explain. The aftermath was quieter than she expected. No one asked too many questions. No one demanded explanations. But inside, Clara had changed. Something in her shifted, not toward paranoia, but toward openness. She started noticing things more, pauses in conversations, whispers in silence, sudden urges to turn left instead of right. Her rational side still ran the show, but now there was a shadow at the table, a presence reminding her that not everything needed to make sense to be real. That anonymous message, it was never traced. Cybersecurity experts found no breach. Her email provider offered no explanation. Eventually, the case was closed as unexplained user activity. But Clara knew better. That message wasn't a glitch, it was a lifeline. And what struck her most wasn't the fear. It was the clarity, the way a single sentence had broken through the noise of her busy life and forced her to listen, to pause, to choose differently. That's the kind of moment that leaves a mark, not just in memory, but in the way you walk through the world afterward. It's like discovering that reality has hidden gears, and once you've seen them turn, you can't unsee them. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the most disturbing part isn't the warning itself, it's what happened in the days that followed. The subtle patterns, the faces that started showing up in unexpected places, and a discovery Clara made that would make her question whether she was truly alone in that decision, or if someone, somewhere, had chosen for her. The morning of the flight began like any other, the kind of day Clara had lived through dozens of times without thinking twice. Her suitcase was zipped and standing by the door, her laptop charger neatly packed next to a folder of notes from the conference. She had checked out of the hotel early, grabbed a quick coffee from the lobby machine, and already called the cab to LaGuardia. Everything was in order, down to the boarding pass in her email and the weather forecast she'd memorized the night before. Clear skies, no delays, just another flight, another day, another return to her carefully structured life. But something felt heavier, not physically, but in the air around her. It was subtle, like the feeling of forgetting something, important and not knowing what. She brushed it off as post-conference fatigue, maybe nerves from being away from the kids too long. Nothing she couldn't shake off with a nap once she got home. When the cab pulled up to the curb of her brownstone in Boston hours later, everything was still quiet. Her sister had already left with the kids to give Clara some time to settle in before picking them up. That silence, usually comforting, suddenly felt too still. She placed her suitcase by the door, reached into her coat pocket for the keys, and that's when she saw it. Folded in half, slipped under the welcome mat, was a letter. No envelope, no name, just a single piece of paper, folded once with precision. At first, she thought it was a flyer or a neighborhood notice, maybe one of those handouts about garage sales or lost pets. But as she picked it up and opened it, a chill slid down her spine. There, in handwriting that looked hurried but deliberate, were the same words she had seen hours earlier in that anonymous email: "Don't get on that plane." Nothing else. No signature, no explanation, no way to tell who had written it or why. Her breath caught in her throat. Clara looked up and scanned the street. Empty. A jogger in the distance, a car passing slowly, the usual city rhythm. But in that moment, everything felt off balance, as if the world had paused to watch what she would do next. She stepped inside, locked the door behind her, and sat on the edge of the staircase, with the paper still in her hand. This wasn't random. It couldn't be. 2 messages, identical wording, delivered through 2 completely different channels, one digital, one physical, within the same 12-hour window. Something about it felt calculated, or intentional. She checked her phone. Dozens of notifications were coming in about the flight. Apparently something had gone wrong shortly after takeoff. Initial reports were vague, but there was talk of cabin pressure issues and an emergency descent. The airline hadn't released names or details yet. Clara couldn't stop shaking. She stared at the note again. Same 5 words. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. From that moment on, Clara stopped looking at the situation as coincidence. She began to question the structures she had always trusted: schedules, facts, safety protocols. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that there were forces at work outside of logic, that maybe the things we call unexplainable are simply truths we haven't learned to measure yet. And still, she couldn't figure out what disturbed her more, the message itself or the way it had arrived. Someone had been close enough to walk up to her house, to place the note there, knowing when she would return. That meant they knew her address, her schedule, the flight number, maybe even more. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely protected. There was no trace of anyone on the doorbell camera. No footage, no figure caught walking up, no car pulling over, just a 2-second glitch, a brief flicker of static at 4:16 a.m., the exact same time the email had been sent. A digital silence that seemed to echo louder than any scream. From that point on, Clara started seeing patterns, names that repeated in places they shouldn't, street signs that seemed to change, a feeling that someone was one step ahead of her, leaving breadcrumbs not to scare her, but to guide her. It was subtle, delicate, but undeniably present. This wasn't just about a missed flight anymore. It had become a shift in perspective, a tear in the fabric of certainty. Clara was no longer just a passenger returning home. She was someone who had been chosen somehow to receive a warning that most people never get. And with that realization came another, more terrifying question. If someone went to such lengths to save her from that plane, what were they trying to keep her alive for? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the real mystery wasn't what she avoided, but what she was about to walk into. Clara stared at the note for what felt like hours. 5 words, nothing more. Don't get on that plane. The simplicity of it was disarming. No dramatic flair, no cryptic symbols or riddles. Just a direct sentence, written as if the person who composed it didn't have time for anything else. Or perhaps they knew that was all it would take. And the strangest part? It worked. It reached a place in her that logic couldn't touch. Not fear exactly, not confusion, but something older, more primal, a ripple in her sense of certainty. She read it again and again, each time hearing it in a different tone, whispered, urgent, exhausted, or almost pleading. Who wrote it? Why her? Why now? It didn't feel like a prank. Clara had received prank emails before, obvious scams, obnoxious messages, marketing traps disguised as alerts. But this one had weight. She walked slowly to the kitchen, holding the paper like it might evaporate if she moved too fast. Her coffee sat untouched, her suitcase still by the door, perfectly packed, ready for a trip she would never take. And yet all she could think was, someone knew. Someone out there knew what was going to happen before it did. Was it a friend? But who would do that without identifying themselves? She tried to picture her inner circle. Co-workers, her sister, old friends from college. No one came to mind who would have both the means and the knowledge. And even if they had known, wouldn't they have picked up the phone, left a voicemail? This was too cold, too detached to be from someone who cared in a conventional way. She started questioning everything. Had someone been watching her, following her movements, reading her emails? The idea seemed ridiculous until she remembered the timing. The message had come at 4:16 a.m., the same time the glitch happened on her doorbell camera, the same time she had jolted awake in the hotel, her heart pounding for no reason. Her rational mind kept trying to push through. Maybe it was all a coincidence, a strange sequence of events that, when stacked together, gave the illusion of meaning. But that theory broke down every time she stared at those words. There was something embedded in them. Not just a warning, but a kind of presence. It wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. She tried to shake it. She went for a walk, turned off her phone, even considered going to a cafe to clear her head. But everywhere she went, the phrase followed, like a rhythm stuck in her mind. She could still see it behind her eyelids. Don't get on that plane. Her thoughts spiraled in waves. Was it some sort of divine intervention? A message from a future she narrowly avoided? Or something even more unsettling? Was she part of a test? Had she unknowingly stepped into something larger, something with rules she couldn't see yet? The emotional toll was subtle but steady. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a fog where something was waiting but refusing to show itself. Every routine action, making toast, feeding the cat, answering emails, felt distant, like her life was playing in the background of a movie she was no longer part of. And that's when she realized the most unnerving part. The message didn't feel like a warning from someone. It felt like a decision, as if the choice had already been made for her and she was only catching up to it. Now, like a ripple arriving on shore long after the stone had been thrown, she tried to convince herself she was imagining things. But deep down, something had shifted. Her sense of reality, once firm and structured, was now pliable, a surface she could press against, but no longer trust. She started reading about similar cases, scouring forums and news archives for people who had received inexplicable warnings before disasters. The deeper she went, the more she found. Stories of people who missed trains that later derailed, who skipped concerts that ended in tragedy, who changed plans at the last second for reasons they couldn't explain. Patterns began to emerge, not just in the stories, but in how they were treated. Most were dismissed, ridiculed, or brushed off as coincidence, but a few described the same sensation Clara couldn't shake, that their decision wasn't fully theirs, that something had whispered just loud enough for them to hear, and when they listened, their lives branched off in a direction that no longer felt random. It was then that Clara realized this wasn't about knowing the future, it was about being guided away from it. She thought of the letter again, how it had found its way into her life with such precision, and felt a strange blend of awe and dread. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Clara would discover next wouldn't just shake her beliefs, it would force her to confront a truth hidden in plain sight, buried beneath routine, and sealed behind one haunting possibility, that whoever sent the message wasn't finished yet. Clara stood in the middle of her living room, the silence around her suddenly too loud, too present. The note still rested on the kitchen counter, its 5 words echoing in her mind like a ticking clock. Don't get on that plane. It shouldn't have meant anything. It wasn't signed. It wasn't specific. And yet it had dismantled every layer of her mental structure in a matter of hours. She could feel it, not just in her thoughts but in her body, a tightness in her chest, a faint trembling in her hands, the invisible weight of uncertainty pressing against her skin. She looked at the time. There was still a narrow window. If she moved quickly, called another cab, grabbed her suitcase, pushed the doubts away, she could make it to the airport just in time to catch the next available flight. A part of her screamed to do exactly that, to shake off the fear, to reclaim control, to remind herself that she was rational, grounded, and not someone who threw away plans because of anonymous messages. But another voice, quieter, deeper, kept whispering, "What if it's true?" It wasn't a loud question. It didn't come with drama. It was subtle, almost shy, but it had a strange power. Because no matter how hard Clara tried to dismiss it, that single what if rooted itself in her thoughts and refused to let go. She paced, sat, stood again. Her mind became a storm of contradictions. You're being ridiculous. You're protecting yourself. This is paranoia. This is caution. It's nothing. It's everything. Every thought carried its own tone, its own rhythm, like different characters battling in the same monologue. She thought of her children, of their voices, their routines, their drawings still stuck on the fridge. She thought of how easily this could be dismissed if nothing happened, just a strange day, a funny story for later. But if she ignored the warning, and something did happen, she wouldn't get another chance. The logic was failing her. That was the most disorienting part. She had always relied on reasoning. She built financial strategies for companies, forecasted risks, made decisions based on data, but this had no data, no numbers, no explanations, just a gut feeling amplified by a mystery she couldn't untangle. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could rebook, she could go, but she didn't move. The longer she hesitated, the more her body aligned with one conclusion. She didn't want to go, not because she was certain of danger, but because ignoring that feeling now would be a betrayal of something inside her, a part of herself that had been trying to speak long before this letter arrived. Clara wasn't superstitious. She didn't believe in omens or fate, but this wasn't about belief. It was about recognition. Something about the situation felt too specific to dismiss, too intentional, too intimate. Like the message wasn't just a warning, it was meant for her and only her. That was what truly unsettled her. She sat down, closed her eyes, and let the decision settle. Not with drama, not with panic, just stillness. A quiet decision rooted in instinct. She wouldn't fly that day. She didn't need to explain it. Not to her boss, not to her friends, not even to herself. She would say she wasn't feeling well. She would call it a scheduling mistake, but deep down, she would know the truth. She chose to listen. And the moment she let herself fully accept that decision, something strange happened. Not relief, not regret, but clarity. A fragile kind of peace, like aligning with a current she hadn't realized she was fighting against. Her mind stopped spinning. Her body felt lighter. It didn't make sense, and maybe it never would. But she no longer needed it to. What Clara didn't realize yet was that this decision wasn't the end of the mystery. It was the entrance, a doorway into something far more intricate. Because when you start listening to things you can't explain, the world around you begins to shift. Symbols appear, patterns repeat, and the reality you once trusted begins to show its seams. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because once Clara obeyed that instinct, the world didn't go quiet. It started to speak louder. The first alert came through a push notification. Clara had left her phone on silent, face down on the kitchen table, trying to create some kind of barrier between herself and the digital chaos she knew was coming. But even with the volume off, the screen lit up like a flare in the dark. Her eyes caught the headline as she passed by. Breaking. Flight 784 crashes after takeoff. Fatalities reported. Her feet stopped moving. She picked up the phone with hands that no longer felt like hers. For a second, the world narrowed into one sharp moment of disbelief. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. There were always technical issues, emergency landings, overreactions. She clicked the article expecting clarification, but the deeper she read, the more the illusion unraveled. The plane had gone down minutes after departure. A sudden loss of control, no distress call, no survivors. Flight 784, her flight. She dropped into the nearest chair, the phone still glowing in her hand. The words didn't feel like they belonged to the real world. No survivors. It sounded like something from a movie, detached and dramatic. But this wasn't fiction. It was her reality now. A reality she'd narrowly avoided because of 5 words written by someone she couldn't name. Her chest tightened. It wasn't fear. It wasn't relief. It was something much harder to name, a mix of guilt and wonder. She imagined the people she saw at the gate, the man who had smiled at her in the security line, the woman with a toddler in tow asking if it was a full flight. She could see them, still alive in her memory, even though they were already gone. She should have been there. She refreshed the article, hoping it would change. It didn't. Details trickled in slowly. Debris found along the coast. A rescue team halted by poor visibility. Speculation about mechanical failure. But the one detail that refused to fade was that number, 100% fatality. Every soul on board lost, except hers. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Her emotions were frozen under layers of disbelief. Instead, she stared at the window, watching the sunlight shift across the wall, her mind locked in a loop. Who sent the warning? Why only her? And why that moment? It didn't feel like luck. It didn't even feel like coincidence anymore. It felt deliberate, chosen, selected. But by whom? Or what? She checked the email again. Still no trace of a sender. She pulled the paper from the kitchen counter, ran her fingers over the ink like it could offer some kind of answer. But the message remained unchanged, stubborn in its simplicity. Don't get on. In that plane, she remembered every second of her hesitation that morning, the doubt, the inner conflict, the quiet decision to trust something she couldn't explain. And now, with the weight of the news pressing down on her, she realized how thin that line had been between being alive and not. The guilt began to bloom slowly in the silence between headlines. Why her? Why not someone else? Why was she spared while others weren't? It wasn't a question she could answer, but it echoed anyway, looping endlessly in her chest. Survivor's guilt isn't always loud. Sometimes it creeps in through quiet moments when the world keeps spinning as if nothing happened. The days that followed were a blur. Calls from the airline confirming she had been on the manifest. Emails asking if she needed grief counseling. Her name on a list of miraculous near misses being passed around by media outlets desperate for a human angle. But she didn't feel like a miracle. She felt like a question that had never been asked out loud. At night, Clara found herself replaying every second, the moment she opened the note, the tension in her spine, the weight of uncertainty. And with each replay, the same thought returned. Whoever sent that message knew something. Something she didn't. Something no one else did. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a coincidence. It was knowledge. And knowledge like that doesn't just appear. It comes from somewhere. She wondered if she had been watched, studied, targeted, protected. None of the answers brought her comfort. They only deepened the mystery. And yet, mixed with the confusion, there was a strange clarity taking root in her, a quiet shift in her worldview. The rules she'd lived by no longer applied. Rationality alone couldn't explain this. Her story now lived in the space between truth and mystery, between fear and something bigger than fear. She started looking around her differently, not with paranoia, but with openness. She noticed the people who watched her for a second too long. The way shadows seemed to move a beat behind her steps, the subtle feeling of being observed. Not with malice, but with purpose. It wasn't haunting. It was almost familiar. That note didn't just save her life. It opened something. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the real question isn't how she survived, but what she was meant to do with that second chance. Clara had always believed that every action left a trace, that in a world of surveillance cameras, timestamps, and digital footprints, nothing truly disappeared. But when she tried to find out who had slipped that warning note under her door, she was met with something far more unsettling than evidence: complete and utter silence. It started with the most obvious steps. She contacted the building's front office to review the security footage. The cameras had been installed only a year earlier, a precaution after a string of neighborhood break-ins. Everything was recorded, Every delivery, every visitor, even the occasional raccoon rummaging through the trash. But when the building manager pulled the footage from that night, there was nothing. Not a glitch, not a blur. Just absence. At 4:15 a.m., the sidewalk in front of Clara's brownstone was empty, no figure approaching, no shadow on the steps. And yet, the letter had been there, dry, precise, waiting beneath her welcome mat at 6:38 a.m. when she returned from the cancelled flight. The timestamp didn't lie, the footage did. Or something had intervened with both. She knocked on neighbors' doors, people she'd only ever exchanged polite greetings with in the elevator. Most hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. A few didn't even remember if they were home that night. One neighbor recalled a strange flickering of the hallway lights around 4 a.m., but chalked it up to the city's aging electrical system. No one had witnessed a visitor. No one had seen a letter being placed. It was as if the note had materialized from thin air. Clara took the letter itself to a local lab. She paid out of pocket for a private analysis. Fingerprints, ink type, paper source. The technician was methodical, but after a week of waiting, the results came back empty. No prints. The ink was generic, the paper untraceable. Even the fold lines didn't suggest repetitive handling. It was clean, too clean, as if the message had been designed to erase itself the moment it had served its purpose. And that was the detail that haunted her most. This wasn't just the absence of evidence, it was the presence of intentional erasure. Whoever sent the message didn't just want to stay hidden. They knew how to disappear completely. She considered every possibility. Was it some covert agency, a government whistleblower, an AI algorithm trained to predict catastrophes? The ideas sounded absurd when she said them out loud, but internally she cycled through every potential explanation. Because what else was she supposed to do with the reality she now lived in? The most difficult part wasn't the lack of answers. It was the realization that the absence itself was the answer. That the person, or force, behind the note didn't want to be found. And more than that, they didn't need to be. Clara started keeping a notebook, not just to process her emotions, but to track the details, the timeline, the silence, the questions that multiplied instead of fading. Her handwriting grew more frantic as the days passed. She would pause mid-sentence, lost in the idea that she was documenting something that no one would believe, something meant to be forgotten as quickly as it happened. But she couldn't forget. One night, she dreamt of the letter. Not just the message, but the moment it was delivered. In the dream, someone in a long, dark coat walked up her front steps, but their face was blurred, not pixelated, just erased. She couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. They didn't ring the bell. They didn't knock. They simply placed the folded note on the mat, turned and vanished into the fog. When she woke, the feeling lingered like smoke. Not fear, not peace, just a heavy knowing. From that day on, Clara's curiosity transformed into something deeper, a quiet obsession. She began to view her survival not as luck, but as an assignment, like she had been spared for a reason, and now that reason was unfolding piece by piece in front of her. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Clara discovered next would not only reframe everything she thought she understood, it would pull her into a truth hidden far beneath the surface of what we call reality. Clara wasn't religious. She didn't grow up lighting candles or whispering prayers before bed. Her worldview had always leaned toward logic, strategy, cause and effect. But after what happened, after a piece of paper without fingerprints saved her life while everyone else on that flight vanished, something in her began to shift. Not in an instant, not dramatically. It started as a quiet crack in her certainty, a barely noticeable fracture that allowed a different kind of possibility to seep through. She couldn't stop thinking about the note. Not just what it said, but how it arrived. No footsteps, no footage, no sender. A warning that came out of nowhere and delivered her from what should have been the end of her story. And in the absence of a rational explanation, Clara found herself drifting towards something she would have once dismissed without hesitation, the idea of divine intervention. At first, the thought embarrassed her. Was she really going to attribute this to angels, to unseen beings delivering messages on her doorstep? But the more she resisted the idea, the more it kept circling back, like a thread pulling her towards something she couldn't name, but deeply felt. And then she began to remember stories, things she'd heard in passing, dismissed as coincidence now, returning with new meaning. Like the man who was late to work on the morning of a building collapse because his child had spilled juice on his shirt, forcing him to change. Or the woman who had a dream about a bridge snapping and, shaken, chose a different route the next day, only to see on the news that the very bridge had collapsed during rush hour. Back then, Clara had filed these stories under random luck. But now, they felt like echoes of something intentional. She dove into forums, articles, first-hand accounts. She read about people who spoke of receiving signs, not in booming voices or dramatic visions, but in subtle moments. A stranger saying a sentence that struck the heart like thunder, a song playing at the exact right moment, a repeated number, a dream so vivid it felt like a visitation, a whisper when no one was near, a note on a doorstep with 5 words that changed everything. Some called them angels, others called them guides, guardians, watchers, messengers. The labels varied, but the pattern was consistent. The intervention was quiet, discreet, delivered just in time, and always without credit, no signature, no spotlight, just a shift, a nudge, a voice without sound. The more Clara read, the more she began to feel less alone, not because she found someone who had lived exactly what she had, but because the thread of invisible help ran through so many lives in ways people rarely spoke about out loud. Why? Because no one wants to sound crazy. No one wants to admit that something impossible happened, that maybe, just maybe, they were protected by something they couldn't see. She remembered her dream again. The faceless figure, the feeling of being watched, not in fear but in vigilance, a presence that didn't seek to control, only to warn. It stayed with her in the days that followed, like a shadow she could never quite catch. And oddly, she wasn't afraid of it. In fact, it comforted her. The truth is, Clara wasn't looking for faith. She wasn't trying to join a church or find a label. What she was searching for was meaning, and in that search, she began to understand something that many people never say out loud. Sometimes the most powerful help doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like a moment, a pause, a message, a shift in direction that seems small, until you look back and realize it's saved everything. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because if someone, or something, stepped in to protect Clara, then the question isn't just who sent the message, it's why she was chosen to receive it, and what she was being prepared for next. We often move through life on autopilot, eyes open, but not truly seeing, ears hearing, but not always listening. We explain away the unexplainable, brush off the unusual, and silence that small inner voice before it can speak too loudly. But what if some of the things we call coincidences are actually something else entirely? What if those strange feelings, those gut reactions, those interruptions in our plans were never accidents? After what happened to Clara, that question became impossible to ignore. She started reflecting on moments that once felt random, now seen through a different lens. Like the time she took a different route home without knowing why, only to find out there had been an accident on her usual street. Or when she hesitated to say yes to a last-minute event and later learned something unsettling had unfolded there. Were these just lucky escapes or quiet warnings she had unknowingly obeyed? It makes you wonder, how many times have we been guided without even realizing it? Maybe that time you felt an urge to check on someone wasn't just intuition. Maybe it was a nudge. Maybe the unease you felt before signing that contract, or getting in that car, or entering that room was something trying to whisper a truth you couldn't yet see. We've all felt it, that subtle shift in the air, that cold sensation crawling up the spine, that moment where logic says go, but something else says wait. And because we don't see the full picture, because we want proof and explanations, we often dismiss those signs. But what if we've been taught to ignore the very language that's meant to protect us? Spiritual traditions across the world speak of messengers, call them angels, protectors, ancestors, divine presences. The names vary, but the pattern doesn't. They don't always speak in thunder or miracles. More often, they move in the quiet. A misplaced object that delays you just enough, a phone call at the exact right second, a sudden feeling of dread that makes you turn around. And yes, sometimes, a note with no sender, left just before everything changes. It's easy to forget how much we're surrounded by what we cannot see. We live in a world of energy, of signals, of silent communications that don't need words. But because they're not loud, we overlook them. And when we do, we risk missing something vital. We've been trained to seek answers in what we can measure, yet some of life's most important truths aren't meant to be measured. They're meant to be felt. So what if we started paying attention again? What if instead of silencing that quiet inner voice, we started trusting it? What if we treated those small coincidences as invitations to pause, to reflect, to notice what's happening beneath the surface? There's a certain humility that comes when we accept that we're not fully in control, that maybe, just maybe, we're being guided, watched, cared for in ways we can't always comprehend. Clara's experience wasn't just about being saved from a flight. It was about being seen by something that existed beyond explanation, beyond science, beyond the physical. And once you open yourself to that idea, you begin to see your own life differently. You start remembering moments where things didn't make sense but worked out anyway. Times when you felt protected but couldn't explain why. The voice you ignored, the sign you brushed off, the decision you made without understanding, only to look back and realize that was the moment everything changed. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because once you begin to see the signs, the real question becomes, are you ready to follow where they lead? If Clara had ignored the note, she wouldn't be here. That's the part that stays with you long after the details fade. Not the paper, not the ink, not even the mysterious silence behind it, but the simple, irreversible truth that one quiet decision, guided by something she couldn't explain, changed everything. Sometimes life doesn't shout. It doesn't give us flashing signs or loud warnings. It speaks in whispers, in delays, in gut feelings, in dreams that linger when we wake up. It speaks through timing that doesn't make sense, until it does. The invisible isn't always dramatic. Often it's gentle, subtle, but always present. We don't always understand the language of the unseen, but we feel it. We know it, even when we can't prove it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some truths are meant to be felt, not solved. Maybe listening to that quiet voice inside, that intuition, that nudge, that pause, is one of the most powerful forms of protection we have. Clara didn't need evidence. She needed trust. And by listening, by choosing to follow that inner discomfort instead of logic, she stepped into the kind of transformation that only comes when we accept that some things are bigger than us. Her story is a reminder, not just that guidance exists, but that it can come to us at any moment in any form. So ask yourself, what if that strange hesitation you felt last week wasn't just a thought? What if that message you almost deleted had meaning? What if something has already tried to reach you, softly, patiently, and is simply waiting for you to listen? Because sometimes the invisible speaks, and when it does, it's not trying to scare us. It's trying to keep us here, whole, awake, aligned with something greater than logic. If you're still here with me, then something in this story truly spoke to you. Maybe it stirred a memory, a quiet feeling you hadn't looked at in a while, or maybe it simply reminded you that there's more to this world than what we can see. If this kind of content resonates with you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We'll keep exploring stories that move us, challenge us, and open space for reflection. Stories that feel like they arrive at just the right moment. And if you made it to the end, drop a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you till the end." That way, I'll know you felt this too, that we're on this path together. If this video made you feel something, leave a like, not just for the content, but for the connection we've built here. There's another video right here that continues this journey and takes the conversation even deeper. Click on it and come with me. I'll see you there.